What up, my devil? Sensei-tutum here with another ETH video for ya. So another week, another meh price action. We do have quite a bit to talk about as the triangle that I showed you last week has violated, which hey, full disclosure, I've always told you I suck at triangles, right? But there's, it doesn't change my opinion. Nothing is telling me that the bottom is in. I wish that it was. I am not using any sort of bias. I have not sold massive amounts of positions that I'm hoping to reinvest down here or much further or any of that. I'm just here and analyzing the charts for you guys. And I think to adequately explain why, we'll definitely talk about the count, and that's important. But I think we conceptually need to talk about the theory and about the market. And by the theory, I mean Elliott wave. And then conceptually, we need to talk about this market in particular, but every market. So this is what I would say is definitely not something I would typically post to the public YouTubes. I would probably post it to our social/educational tier, not quite educational level. But I think for this week, it's appropriate to go ahead and post it public. And in that regard, stick around till the end for a channel update. But if you're not into the educational type stuff, just watch the analysis on the hard right edge, which we're about to dive into right now. And so anyway, let me get in. So we're conceptually out here, right? And that we have been watching this unfold. And when this made this low, we said that it was an adequate low to be a potential in for the whole correction, which started back here, right? In what I've been outlining ever since back here, is that it was adequate. It was a little less than what we wanted, but it was adequate. However, price action has been uncertain, certainly off the low, but it's starting to really sort of fortify itself. Even though that triangle, as I had told you guys, I suck at triangles, did violate. I think this thing, maybe there's another triangle in there, and I believe that there is. So let's first talk about the wave that has started this all, because it's so important to anchor yourself. And this is where we'll get into, I want to talk more about this count, and then we'll sort of talk conceptually about this idea. But you really want to anchor yourself on good patterns. And this is the first move off the low. And what people that are more experienced in the theory, more advanced, will always complain that I can't tell between, how can you tell, like, one waves sometimes look like corrective waves and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they do. They're really hard to identify. And I'm going to go a little bit into that now and that's the conceptual thing we're going to talk about when we zoom back out. But that will be a very in-depth educational video, couple videos probably in the near future for the educational members. So if you're interested, there's going to be a lot of good stuff coming up soon. Anyway, it's very important to be able to identify a one as opposed to a corrective. It's probably top two difficult things to do in a lot of scenarios, depending on how that one plays out, obviously. And between that and identifying properly a triangle, for me, are like the two hardest things. But I think that the triangle is the hardest, because I think identifying motives or correctives off the low is actually something that it's a code that can be cracked easily for me. And I will tell you who has the triangle code cracked. The other hardest thing is Sensei Dave. That man, he hits his triangles, dude. I suck at them, as I've told you. Anyway, so we started out calling this a motive wave, and there was two reasons why. One, because we traded it in real time. This, by the dominant swings, this was playing out in real time like a freaking motive, and that it, extended third swing, big moves, exaggerated moves relative to this one. This felt like a three wave in play, even though there was a bit of funkiness in here, right? And we can dig in that, I didn't really even bother counting this in real time. I was just in observation mode. I think that is a very strong, important thing to be able to do. Talking about educational videos, this is another one that's coming up, is when to ignore subwave structure. Well, not when to, it's just that, put it plainly, is ignore subwave structure that is unclear, and do not ignore obvious subwave structure. and we're all talking relative to trading degree because I'm a trader, but really at the degree of concern if you're a hodler, right? So ignore unclear subwave structure, and do not ignore clear subwave structure. It's an important thing to be able to do, and it's one of the most misused things, which is why I think that it's gonna need a educational video, part of a series probably, to get into and explain. But we were sort of not necessarily paying as close of attention to this, and I also preach against this, but also because Bitcoin, where's Bitcoin? Bitcoin, oh, spoiler, Bitcoin played out as an obvious, impulse, right? It was very, as far as the 3 goes. But in any event, you don't trade one chart. You don't TA one chart based on another, but, you get hints from Bitcoin about alts, right? Anyway, that's why we started with this as a motive wave. But then we pivoted to a corrective, and sometimes you got to do this, right? Either way, we had this truncation here. This truncation is important. This truncation, you'll never find another piece of content from me in the past where I have identified a truncation this hard right edge, but when it fits, it fits. It's very rare, and that's why I always say identify them way to the left of the chart. I'm pointing with both fingers to the left. You can't see me. And, because you don't really want it to be able to affect what you're doing on the hard right edge when you go ahead and accept it, kind of thing. But either way, at this juncture, whether this finished here or a motive wave finished here, what is this? So the beautiful thing about identifying triangles in play is, like I said, the hardest thing for me in Elliott wave. But once they have completed, you have a much higher probability of being correct in identifying that completion, right? So let's just identify swings here. So if we're going to stick to the truncation, use that as an anchor. Even if we don't, I'm fine to do that as well. Let's just work on dominant swings from here. All these are threes. Like, DM me if you want to argue with it about this. I didn't draw those well, but dominant swings, identifying these dominant, we'll get down to the 2R. Identifying these dominant swings within here tells us that we have a triangle. Because what else could this, what is this? Let's go ahead and get rid of that. What else could this be, right? And that in of itself, now that we can identify that triangle, we can anchor ourselves to that triangle in a much higher probability way than as when they're in play. Because when they're finished, it's like they're very clear. So if this is a triangle, we know that it cannot be a 2-wave. That's one of the reasons that triangles are such a good anchor. And, if you, again, get in, I'm pitching the educational stuff today. If you get into educational stuff, you can see much more why they're such good anchors. But we'll just say that today, that they are not able to be 2 waves. And so that means that if you are identifying this as an impulsive wave to here, you're certainly not doing it to here, right? You're certainly not calling this a 1. If anything, your 1 ends there. If you practice this theory in any sort of probabilistic projecting kind of way, your 1 would not end here. It would end here if you're a bull. Well, I don't see any other way to properly identify this unless we were going to call this like a W, and then this is like an X or something, and working on a Y. A, B, C, maybe D, E, or something like that, right? So another triangle. So if this isn't a triangle at this degree, it's a triangle at that degree. And either way, there's some sort of triangle in here. So that should just alert you to the fact that, hey, if I trust this theory, that I probably shouldn't expect this to be start of a new trend in the upward direction, right? And we'll zoom out, and I want to talk conceptually about the chart and maybe the theory a little bit to that regard. But I think that that's sort of the conceptual level of the theory aspect, right? Is that if we've identified a triangle completing that has broken to the upside, then that must be identified as something other than a 2. So you need to come up with a count where that isn't a 2. Or it isn't a triangle. And if it's not a triangle, then that's still corrective to the upside. Right? So no matter how way you want to cope with it, if you're, let's just say, rational and informed on Elliott wave, that's what you think. And you could always be wrong. We can always be wrong. And, you know, back when I was identifying this triangle and telling you guys, I told you, maybe next week we're going to be way up here. Well, we've broken out to the upside, and then I would be wrong. But overall, I think it has given me more conviction, unfortunately, for the downside move. Because that's not what I want. I don't want the downside move. I'm not a perma bear. But it's funny is when I do post Twitter charts, it's like I always, which isn't often, I always get that like implication that I am a perma something or another. I'm not. I just do the TAs. Anyway, I do form bias, but I use it properly. And we'll get into that maybe too. I think I already mentioned that. I can't remember. So yeah, there's that at this level. And then let's conceptually look, just zoom out and look at this price action. Higher lows, lower highs. And then we break out. So that's that. But at what point on this chart that we've had a major pivot low do we see something like this? So we had a lower high here, but it was a damn near test of the high, right? So we didn't, that's not what this is doing. This is significantly lower lows, right? Whereas this low, damn near tested the high. And then we sort of drifted up. And then this one created a new low there, right? So doesn't look like that one. Certainly doesn't look like this one. Not that that was typical. So it doesn't really look, let's go to log so we can see this stuff better, like typical bottoms, typical low side pivots, low side pivots, low side pivots. So, and we've continued to decrease in volume. The highs of the volume, even now, are continuing to go down. Let's see. Let's compare that over to here. So let's just zoom on this one as an example. So actually, let's go back to this real quick. And instead of using, we'll get rid of these outliers and we'll use the lower high. The guys here. Still, the trend is down, right? No matter which way you slice it, pretty sideways like price, but generally weak, weakening, not showing any form of increased activity. See here, we made this low and then we had this giant spike retest. A lot of activity. And then it didn't give us much information. Look at this. We had this. So this low is significant, of course, but it's just not that similar. So this one, I would say, is more similar to the one we're looking at. But we made another low relative, another double bottom relative to this triple bottom, whatever. Whereas here we have not done that. So we know that there's going to be buying down here. We know that. But just nothing about this is telling us that, you know, if this is the start of a three wave, you know, let's see where it does break out of these sideways masses, right? Because this would be the breakout, right? So how does it start? Just using our chart, knowing our chart, volume is climbing. Volume climbs out All right, here's the low. Volume climbs out, right? There's the low. Price moves up. This one. There's the low on the price. Oops. Let's do the volume. There's the low. Okay. So if we've identified this as our low, nothing that gives us a lot of conviction, huh? And in fact, the higher we're getting here, the lower the volume is going. Divergence. We didn't get that. Well, we actually had divergence here. And that is when you really know that you got a strong move, is when you break out of like serious divergence. But we've got single pivot on this time frame at this point. So it's not anything to write home about yet. But so looking at our chart, this isn't something that's typical of a giant bottoming, right? Whether that's not that giant, but this was giant, you know. Now this one kind of similar, but this is barely a retracement, right? So we want to look at big retracements like this. There's a lot of uncertain bottoms. Don't get me wrong. Breakout, volume increases. We'd have to zoom in tighter to this area, but this chart does give us a lot of uncertain bottoms, so we could be wrong. But let's get rid of everything. Thank you. All right. This one is just not necessarily singing the bottoming, you know, not using Elliott wave, just looking at these. It's just not singing the bottoming signals to me. So I hope the bottom is in, but if I'm just using typical price expectation, probable expectation, which you're going to be wrong a lot when you do, but you're going to be wrong, right, more than any other way of practicing the theory. I just don't think it's done. I just don't think we've topped. So there's that. Now, do I want to cover okay, let's briefly cover the conceptual level of bias. And I want to do that again because we'll get to a channel update right after this. And spoiler to that, you're not going to probably see me on here for quite some time. Anyway, so I just want to give you guys all the goodies, you know. Let's talk about bias. I was talking to a public member, and yeah, if you join the Discord, the public, and you at me, I'm going to talk to you, and I'm going to have a real conversation with you. This guy's been in the Discord for years. He's active. He's a good guy. And, you know, probably a pretty smart guy. But I think that he is having a problem, and I'm not going to name him, that I see so commonly. So I want to point it out. Well, first he said that, you know, trade devils, you guys think that you shouldn't have a bias, and that's not true. We think that you need to use bias. Well, I'll just speak for myself. You need to use bias properly if you're going to employ it in your charts. What does that mean? It means that for me, as I like to say, you know, all the time for educational videos especially, is that when you're building counts, you're sort of, you know, it's like a spreadsheet in your mind. And you could make a spreadsheet. I probably think it's a bad idea, of trying to identify what the probable scenarios are. And so you should be able to identify more than one scenario in every instance, right? Many more typically, right? And then you need to sort of put check marks in this idea supports this scenario, this idea doesn't support it. So you have let's say your check and your X, and on all and you run down your little spreadsheet in your mind, and then you arrive to, okay, I think this is the most probable, and I think it's at a level of probability that I want to risk money, sort of thing, right? And the way that I think you should use bias, and of course, what's kind of weird is that each one of those checks and X's sort of have different weight values to them, right? If that makes sense. That's, to me, the way you should think about how to employ probability in Elliott wave. Maybe I'll do an educational video about that. In fact, I've done several, but maybe I'll do another. But bias just becomes another check or X in each one of those. And based upon the strength of the bias, it has different weight depending on what you're using for that reasoning and how strongly you feel about it. But at no point does it ever make you, at no point should bias ever make you say that this is 5 waves. Well, I feel strongly, not kind of. I'm not trying to pick on this guy too much, but he kind of said something like that. Like, I don't remember what chart we're talking about. Maybe it was ETH, but basically he said because. And it wasn't this is a direct, but this is let's say an analog to what we were discussing. But because of the fundamentals, I'm so bullish fundamentally. ETH is very bullish fundamentally, and that is something to use in your check mark for the bottom is in. And of course, we do have these uncertain bottoms that we went back and showed that look kind of triangular, then show come out. Although this, I would, and I'm not looking at the subwaves when I do that, but look at this: 5 swings. 3 swings. That's kind of motive, right? So you can go in here and see that the moves to the upside are more, well, this one is probably based on the location here, right? So that could have been a triangle, but that's why you should focus on the bottoms, right? The lows, as opposed to moves within when you're trying to make this know your chart. I always say to know your chart, but anyway. Focus back. We're going to go ahead and end this real soon. So I know that, anyway, your bias should never make you say that this is 5 waves. It should never dictate what you obviously see on the chart. It can make you say, I don't care, but it should never make you say, oh, this is 5 waves. And then that way you're just confirming the bias, right? That is how you fuck up. Anyway, more discussions about that, and I've talked about this before, but more coming up educationally. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive real quick into. So basically, to suffice to say, I don't know, and you never know if the bottom is in or not, right? You never know what the future holds in trading and an analysis. But do I feel any less strongly that the bottom is not in? Not really. Do I feel like I could still be wrong like I have the whole time? Yeah. But if anything, I feel a little bit more, even though it's breaking out to the downside and breaking these trend lines is very significant, just a hair more confident actually that the bottom isn't in. I would love it to be. If this is uncertain areas, like if you've bought down here, if you bought this low, I'm not telling you to sell your position or anything. Like if you're a hodler, I'm just saying to keep your antennas up. Be aware of the potential that the bottom isn't in. Don't get too attached to that idea. Never do that. People get so attached to ideas. That goes back to the bias. It's like, oh, well, this Toot says this is a triangle, so this can't be the bottom, and, I'm going to just anchor to that until my account goes to 0. Don't do that either. Never, you got to be ready to pivot. Be ready to be humble. That's the way to approach the market. Be humble. So yeah, let's get into the channel update a little bit. I always, like every single time I think about YouTube and Twitter, I always think about not doing them anymore, but I like it. I like, getting the word out to, about the Discord to train you guys, because I really do feel passionate about education. And I like being able to educate people that don't necessarily want to spend any money on it. But the channel's not really doing anything, right? So it's not, the whole point of the channel is to potentially spread awareness about trade devils, but I'm not doing that, right? Because everybody that's seen the channel's not growing. They know about trade devils. So I do appreciate you guys, but I think I'm going to quit posting for the foreseeable future. I'm not, and I know that people are going to be like, oh, Toot, you can do this or that. This is how you can be more successful. And it's like, I just want to do what I want to do. And if people are into it, then they're into it. If they're not into it, they're not into it, right? So because I've tried different things, like tweaks here and there, like for instance, just going through 2 weeks ago, because people are saying, why don't you look at traditionals? And I do for the members, but I just going through a bunch of charts and I just banged out a ton of profitable setups for you. Didn't get much interest in that one, but it was traditionals. Didn't expect to necessarily. But the follow-up I did yesterday is trending and starting out to be probably the lowest viewed video I've done in well over a year. So okay, I figured, all right, the first one's going to be bad. Maybe the next one, because people will see that, okay, he's identified this stuff. Maybe we should pay attention. Nah, that's not happening. So it's like people don't like to see me point out highly probable expectations, that, i.e., profitable trades. Those usually my profitable trades, and where I point out all of the reasons I do it, get the least amount of are received the worst, right? From you guys. I don't know why. Maybe because when I know that I'm bad at telling stories, right? I do these in-depth Elliott wave charts, and I barely ever put labels on. So I understand that I suck at this. So I'm not blaming you guys. I'm blaming me. But I'm just doing the things I want to do and how I want to do it. And if it's received well, it's received well, and it's not. So I'm going to, and not to mention, Trade Devils is a part-time gig for me. So when I do these public videos, I'm taking time away from when I could be doing educational content, which is my real passion. I always feel like I have to hold back in this public stuff. So I'm going to devote myself to more educational content for a while. Maybe, I'll finish that stuff and I'll come back to the public YouTubes for funsies or whatever. But at this moment, and maybe I'll even post some more charts on Twitter. I never post on Twitter. Check me out. I'm at sensei-tutum. No space. Maybe I'll post more charts or something. But my charts on there don't do well because, again, I try to show what I think is important and not what people like necessarily. And what people like is what gets you engagement. So it's been a great run. I love you guys. I think that a lot of you do appreciate 700 subs. That's nothing to sniff at. That's a lot of people watching the content, and I do appreciate every single one of you. So if you really want to see the stuff, come on into Trade Devils, or if you're public, I don't know. Let me know that you appreciate it. Maybe I'll come back sooner if I do come back at all. But I think for now, that's where I'm at. So I do appreciate you public subs, educational and you social. You social are going to get more good, let's say, higher quality content too, as far as the education level, conceptions and things like that. But really, this is I got such a list of here real quick, just because I normally would have ended this long ago, but since it's my last one. I've got this whole series planned out I call it the Elliott Files series, because most people that talk about Elliott Wave in an educational sense like to say things about Elliott, but they've never read any of his books. So I reread them all recently, and it was so enlightening. And I'm going to reread them again, but I'm going to do this series called Elliott Files and talk about I'm just going to call it the Elliott Files, and that's all you need to know about that. But I have a long list that'll probably be anywhere from, I'd say, 6 to 15 videos, 5 to 15, who knows? But that's a series I want to do for the educational members, and maybe I'll make those available to people outside the Discord, potentially a couple of these ideas. I did an applied Elliott Wave series at one point that was, I believe, let's just say that people that sell training services use things that they try to latch on to things that they learned in that series. It was really good. I think it's the best Elliott Wave content, higher level training content that exists personally. That's this applied series I did a couple years ago. Well, I'm going to do another one. There's some other things to cover, and not to mention, I've adapted in 2 years. Not really, but there's other things to talk about, and an applied sense, because I called it applied, but I didn't. But I talked about concepts that you could apply to the chart, right? To use profitably. Well, I think we can. I just think that I think we got some room on that. I think that we're going to get into another applied series. Let's see what else. And then I just have a long list of random educational content that I want to do other than those two series, cover again the proper way to use log, every single Elliott Wave pattern in depth, the best way to trade the TDU method, in my opinion, using bias properly. We talked about some of the concepts we talked about here. volume in markets and the way that I use volume, not just with Elliott, with Wyckoff and other things. I've never done any training material on Wyckoff. I've been studying it just as long as Elliott. Member trade reviews, personal trade reviews. There's another series I want to do called Grassroots Elliott. And that's basically sort of like the Elliott files that I'm going to do, but more of just the concepts that are important, because people get so focused on concepts in Elliott Wave because there's a lot, but they focus on the things that aren't important. You need to focus on the things that are important. So I want to do a Grassroots series. But yeah, so there's a lot of educational content to come, and the fact that I'm doing now at this point like 2 public videos a week takes away from that. So I want to focus on that because the public videos is just not enough juice for the squeeze for this. So I appreciate you guys. And yeah, if you want to check out that educational stuff, come over to the Discord. And when I finish all that, maybe I'll be back. We'll see. All right, boys. I appreciate you. Toot salute. Be good.